But Alex,
Pa kayo saan?
from Bodensee. So, may
Bodensee. Ilang oras yung biyahe?
3 to 4.
Ilang buwan na yung 7?
A woman in her third trimester made a decision that stopped people mid-scroll when they read about it. 7 months pregnant, she climbed into a car somewhere in Germany, settled in for nearly 4 hours on the highway, and rode to Stuttgart. Not for a concert, not to visit anyone she loved, not for anything most people would consider worth that kind of physical cost. She went to watch one tennis match, a first-round match on a Tuesday afternoon. And when that detail circulated across Philippine social media on April 13, 2026, nobody needed it explained to them. The significance landed immediately, quietly, the way things do when they're simply true. You don't make that trip for someone you casually admire. You make it for someone who has carved out real space inside you. That's where this story actually lives. Not in the draw sheet, not in the score, but in a car on a German highway with a woman who decided that bearing witness was worth more than comfort. Alex EALA walked into the Porsche Tennis Grand Prix as a 20-year-old mid-stride through one of the most demanding stretches the women's calendar has to offer. Indoor clay in Stuttgart doesn't forgive impatience. The surface is heavy, slow, and uncompromising. It rewards a kind of disciplined patience that most players spend years developing. Ella came in with real preparation behind her. Sandro Vienne was on site. Joan Bosch had been helping shape her clay adaptation in the weeks before. The work was genuine. The focus was there. And still, none of that could fully brace her for what April 14th was going to feel like, not purely as a tennis match, but as an experience she had never had before. Her opponent was Leylah Fernandez. That matchup carried a kind of weight that first-round draws almost never produce. Fernandez has stood at the edge of a Grand Slam final and didn't flinch. She knows what pressure looks like from the inside. She's also a player with Filipino roots, which gave this specific contest a dimension that existed entirely outside rankings and statistics. Two women shaped by the same cultural bloodline, standing across a net from each other in the middle of Europe, while a crowd that had driven across borders chanted one name. That is not a normal Tuesday in Stuttgart. By the time the match began, the Porsche Arena had quietly shifted into something it doesn't usually become. It stopped feeling like a neutral European venue and started feeling like a gathering, like a place Filipino fans had collectively decided to claim as their own for one afternoon. That shift didn't come from nowhere. It came from what Ella has been quietly constructing over the last year and a half. She hasn't just won matches. She has created a gravitational pull, something that draws people toward her story and doesn't let them leave. Stuttgart was the day that pull became impossible to look away from. Stay with that pregnant woman for a moment. Her story deserves more than a passing mention. Consider what her decision actually asked of her body. 7 months along means every hour in a car is a negotiation. You're back. You're breathing. The physical reality of that stage of pregnancy isn't subtle. And she looked at a tournament schedule, saw EALA's name in the first round, and decided that 4 hours on the road was a price worth paying for one match on a clay surface her favorite player is still learning. That's not impulsive. That's deliberate. That's someone who has thought carefully about what this athlete means to her and concluded that being in the room, being one of the voices in that arena, mattered enough to carry the physical cost. She also didn't go alone. She brought a friend. They drove together through Germany, and when they arrived, they walked into a building where other Filipinos had already gathered. Flags out, voices ready, fully present. The clips that went viral after the event captured something that money can't manufacture. You could see the crowd clustering around Ella's arrival. You could hear the chanting. You could watch the entire energy of that building reorganize itself around one person. The Porsche Arena has hosted some of the biggest names in women's tennis for years, but on that specific afternoon, the center of gravity belonged to a 20-year-old from the Philippines who had never set foot in that venue before. That's the EALA effect. Stuttgart put it on full display for anyone who'd somehow managed to miss it. Now here's where the story owes you honesty, because the scoreboard doesn't lie, and there's no version of this that skips past it. The first set went 6-1 to Fernandez. On indoor clay, against a player of that quality, losing an opener that cleanly is a real test of character. A lot of 20-year-olds would let the second set quietly drift away, stop really competing, preserve some dignity, get through it, move on. EALA didn't do that. The second set went 6-4, still Fernandez. But the distance between those two sets tells a story the final scoreline doesn't fully carry. She made Fernandez work, made her earn every game, gave the crowd something to stay loud for. And they stayed loud. They weren't cheering a winner, they were cheering a competitor. There is a real and meaningful difference between those two things, and every single person inside that arena understood it. The fans who had rearranged schedules, crossed borders, shown up with flags and full hearts, they didn't leave that building feeling cheated. They left feeling confirmed. Because what they came to see wasn't a trophy. They came to see who Alex EALA is when the match is hard, the surface is unfamiliar, and the score is going against her. She showed them exactly that. She fought. She stayed present. She didn't hand Fernandez anything. And when it was over, she didn't disappear into a tunnel. She stayed. Signed autographs. Took photos. Gave the people who traveled for her the part of herself the match had temporarily kept at a distance. The connection that matters more than most people acknowledge, out loud. Fans can absorb a loss when the bond they showed up for turns out to be real the moment competition ends. She gave them that. But the moment that truly elevated this story beyond the familiar arc of devoted fans rallying behind a rising star, that moment came from across the net. Leylah Fernandez, fresh off closing out a match against a tenacious opponent on a day loaded with emotion, cultural weight, and crowd noise, didn't walk off and talk about her own performance. She talked about EALA. She said Alex doesn't go down easy, that you can see the fight in her, that you're going to have to take that match. She is not handing it over. Think about what it means for those specific words to come from that specific person. Fernandez isn't a commentator. She's not a fan with a platform. She is the player who stood on the other side of that net, the one who felt every point EALA made her play for in that second set. She had every reason to stay focused entirely on herself, and instead she chose to say out loud that Alex EALA is the kind of opponent you have to go take, not one you simply wait out. That is pure recognition. That is one competitor naming the legitimacy of another in the most credible terms that exist. No amount of fan devotion, no matter how far it travels, carries the weight that those words carry when they come from a Grand Slam finalist who just spent 90 minutes trying to beat. Fernandez also described the match as something close to facing a mirror. Two players with shared roots, similar competitive instincts, a relationship to this sport that runs through the same cultural veins. That detail adds another layer to what Stuttgart produced, because it means the respect she offered wasn't polite generality. It was specific. It came from a place of recognition. She saw something in EALA she understood, and she named it. Step back from the individual match now and look at what Stuttgart actually represented. What showed up in that building on April 14th doesn't have a clean category in sports. It was a diaspora turning a European tennis venue into a cultural gathering point around a 20-year-old athlete. Filipino supporters didn't ask permission to make that space feel like theirs. They simply showed up, in numbers with commitment, and made it happen. That is soft power in its most organic, uncoordinated form. No campaign behind it. No coordinated promotion. Just a community that decided their person was worth showing up for, and then showed up. And the consequences stretch well past one first-round loss in Germany, because the clay season doesn't end in Stuttgart. It moves to Madrid, then Rome, then Paris. Roland Garros, the biggest clay court stage in the world. Every one of those stops now carries a question that didn't exist before this week. Not just how will EALA perform on clay, but how loud can her people make the next venue feel? Stuttgart answered whether the support would travel. The answer was yes. Without hesitation, without condition, even 7 months pregnant, even through 4 hours of German highway. There's something worth sitting with about what this kind of backing actually does for a player in the middle of a difficult surface transition. Clay demands things that aren't always visible in the score. It asks you to be patient when your instincts want urgency. It asks you to accept longer rallies, to trust your movement, to build points in a way that might feel unnatural compared to the surfaces where you feel most at home. That adjustment takes time, and it takes confidence. Confidence that is genuinely difficult to manufacture when you're on the road, far from home, navigating a foreign surface and the daily grind of life on tour. EALA spoke about this directly in Stuttgart. She said her Filipino fans create something electric wherever she plays, that it makes her feel at home on foreign soil. Read that again slowly. Foreign soil is supposed to feel foreign. The whole phrase exists because distance and unfamiliarity are real forces that wear on people. But she described the opposite. Not comfort because the match was easy. Not comfort because Stuttgart felt like Manila. Comfort because her people found her and made the room feel like home anyway. That's what the woman in the car was part of. That's what the chanting and the flags and the viral clips were part of. They weren't just expressing support, they were building shelter. And that changes something for a player grinding through the demands of a European clay season. The complete picture of Stuttgart is this. EALA lost 6-1, 6-4. The clay transition is real and ongoing. Nothing about the result softened her opening set performance. But the full story of that day doesn't belong only to the scoreboard. It belongs to a crowd that crossed borders to be present. It belongs to a player who stayed and connected with her people after the defeat, instead of retreating from the weight of it. It belongs to Leila Fernandez, saying without hesitation that EALA is someone you have to take, not someone who simply fades. It belongs to a woman in her 3rd trimester choosing nearly 4 hours on a German road because she believed the moment was worth the cost. Those things don't cancel the result. They frame it. They give the loss a dignity that results alone can't produce. And they tell you something about what EALA is building that lives entirely apart from her ranking or her win-loss record. She is building a story people feel personally invested in. That is rarer than talent, rarer than early success. It is the quality that separates athletes who are followed from athletes who are carried. Stuttgart was one afternoon. But what it revealed has consequences that reach far beyond Germany, far beyond April, and far beyond whatever the clay season ultimately produces on paper. She left without the win. She left with something that matters more in the long run. Evidence delivered in the most human terms possible, that wherever she goes, her people will find her, and they will make the room feel like home.